What is happening out there, Roto Scouts football fans? Welcome to a, wait for it, Wednesday football show, gang. It only took a year plus, but we finally managed to land a main slate show during the week. How about that? Good to see everybody. Long time no see. Got to wear a lot of hats around here, and flipped over to the football one for this show, but we were just talking baseball not too long ago. Hopefully your baseball slates are out to good starts. Know we've had some action in that slate. I haven't really been following along, been spending those precious minutes between shows, taking Joker out, feeding the pets, running to the store, updating this football dashboard, making sure all the stats are in there, ranking the quarterbacks, putting the rankings into this spreadsheet, and a couple other things, taking the notes, getting the game logs all together so that I have the different games that these quarterbacks have played so far all in one spot. It's going to be about an hour for this one. We're not going marathon. This is not your crazy marathon game-by-game show. The purpose of this show and the way I'm kind of seeing it going forward is that this is going to be just like our plant a flag in the week kind of a show on Wednesdays. Maybe it'll flip to Tuesdays once baseball's over and it's a little bit easier with more time. It'll be our general look ahead, and the way I want to do it is just talk about the game environments. We'll talk about some of the Vegas totals. We'll talk about like how the defenses align against the quarterbacks. We'll refer to skill players. Like, I'm not going to talk about all these quarterbacks and not mention that they have certain skill players to throw to or not. But the focus on skill players, the focus on full stack information will probably be still, a marathon style, or maybe it'll eventually become running backs on Thursday, pass catchers on Friday. We'll see how it all comes together. But the idea of this one is an entry point to the slate. I think the best way to talk about player selection, stack selection anyway, is to just talk about the quarterbacks. So that's what we're going to do on this show. Quarterbacks, game environments, general look ahead. I decided to name the show the last first look show because I assume everybody else's first look show is Monday or Tuesday. And if we're going to do it on Wednesday, it's probably the last one that anybody's going to do. Good crowd in the door already. Harold Haas is here. Andy's here. Cujo's here. Anthony Taylor. Good to see everybody. Late notice show, not expected. I'm sure nobody really had their money on Terry actually gets a show done during the week for football. So we'll see who turns up. But the good news is, especially for my purposes, this can just sit there for a few days now and people can watch it at their leisure. So no worries if we don't get a huge crowd. But while you're here, if you're here, hit the like button, hit the subscribe if you somehow are here. You're among the 4 to 6 people who are in the room right now and you've never heard of us before and you just stumbled across this show. If that's the case, welcome. Congratulations. That's amazing. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. I expect everybody here right now is at least with us. But if you're new, if you're just finding this a couple days from now on Friday or whatever, dive in, join the channel, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and find our Discord as well. Hit rotoscouts.com. That's where our projections live. And check out our Discord. We've got a lot of lively action going on in Discord. All kinds of discussion going on in there all hours of the day about every major sport. Check out our guys over at Ace Mind too. Just letting some people trickle in the door here. Check out our guys over at Ace Mind. All your sim and optimization needs. We will be looking at them on tomorrow's Showdown show. We've been looking at them all throughout for Showdown slates. I'll get them more incorporated in the main slate data going forward because I'll have more time to actively run sims ahead of slates. Just as things cool down a little bit now that the season's underway, now that baseball's winding down, be a little bit easier for a while there. But those guys are great. They've got an optimizer tool. They've got some killer products for sims. Every major sport, DraftKings, FanDuel, 20% off your first month over there with promo code ROTOSCOUTS, all in caps at acemind.io. So, if you're not familiar with the board here, we've got our player position rankings right here. So these are not the stack rankings. The stack rankings are hidden because I haven't run them yet. But to some degree at least, they will follow along a lot of the way with some of these quarterback plays. Lamar Jackson, your QB1 by points. This is our points column on DK, points column on FanDuel, points per dollar value on either site in those columns. We've got our Vegas info, dead in the middle there. A little bit of opponent information, yards per rush attempt, ranked yards per rush attempt, yards per pass attempt, ranked yards per pass attempt. Snaps obviously is pretty irrelevant for quarterbacks. Then we get into some of our passing stats, our rushing stats, and then we've got, this is the full board for every position. So we've got some other details over there. We can also jump over here and just look at some of the pressure numbers, the blitz numbers for the opposing defenses as we go through. Some interesting matchups, not bad totals for a lot of these games. Typically we're looking for something in a healthy mid 40s kind of a total. 46 is nice. 45.5 is typically an appealing game, but I don't mind even the 43.5 in the Indy Chicago game because there's some appealing players there if Caleb Williams can manage to get his act together. Anthony Richardson, definitely interesting at the quarterback spot. Interesting looking values, interesting looking rankings numbers. Several very high totals at 49.5 between Philly and New Orleans. I'm very interested in going back to with Derek Carr and his receiving core. I think there's upside, obviously, in the Hurts side of that thing, but it seems pretty easy to throw on Philly so far this year. It was pretty easy to throw on them last year, and that is a big total. Got Derek Carr projected look like a couple points ahead of some of the other places in the industry, tracking toward another week featured in the above section. This is just me eyeballing the slate. We'll go through these as we go down, but the other big game at the top of the board there, the Baltimore and Dallas game, 49 points and a very close point spread at one. Dallas favored by just one at home, so essentially taking the home field advantage away and just calling it a wash. Not a bad opportunity for some offense on both sides of that one, and that's a good way to just kind of get us going into this slate. Lamar, not exactly discounted. He's very high priced, but he still ranks as value quarterback number 3 on DraftKings, value quarterback number 2 on FanDuel just by pure points per dollar because he's so high end. Projects out great against the Dallas defense that's ranked 23rd so far this year, 4.9 yards allowed per rush attempt, 16th with 6.2 yards allowed per pass attempt. The defense has allowed 3 passing touchdowns in the 2 games. They've generated 27.4% blitz rate. They've come with the blitz 27.4% of the time and generated a pretty monster 47.9% pressure rate. But Lamar has extreme escapability if he needs it, and he's not afraid to stand tall in the pocket against the blitz and just wait for something to develop. So no issues with him against this defense. They've come up with 7 sacks. They've come away with 3 interceptions. They are a high-scoring defense. They can definitely get on the board for fantasy purposes, but this is a really premium quarterback. He's got interesting options as far as his receiving core. I won't say they're great. I'm not the biggest Zay Flowers fan in the world, but he's the lead wide receiver. We've got Mark Andrews at the tight end position sharing time with Isaiah Likely. We've got Rashad Bateman as a very unreliable downfield kind of a receiver. And then a couple just downboard mix and match types. You've also got Justice Hill as a capable receiver coming out of the backfield. He takes most of the passing opportunities. Derrick Henry's there as the big wrecking ball running back, but if you're looking for a pairing with the quarterbacks, most likely going to be Justice Hill, who just kind of projects out for an average day. Just looking down at my other sheet here, looking at some of the numbers, Zay is picking up most of the benefit of Lamar being projected as high as he is, getting a little bit of meat on the Mark Andrews projection. Some of these are going to get refined again throughout the week. This is the initial cut of projections, so you'll see some changes in the numbers as we go through. But right now, it looks like at the very least, Lamar on his own, and he's always playable in a naked lineup, and in quotes naked sense. On his own, he's perfectly fine. Him paired with Zay, him paired with pick your poison between the 2 tight ends. I've got them coming up just about equal. You can stick them in lineups with Zay and go to a Lamar +2, but that does start to get thin if he's going to rush anything in. That becomes a little bit of my concern there when I get too deep with Lamar. So I tend to get him in either him on his own, just at the top of a lineup as a premium spot, or him +1. My Lamar +2s are a little bit on the light side most of the time. You can get there. It's not impossible, and he's got some decent prices to work with in his stack. They'll come up as a decent value number because some of these receivers are not all that expensive. On the other side of that game, Dak and his pretty premium pass catchers and group of talent. Not bad options with CeeDee Lamb leading the way. Obvious monster, true number 1 wide receiver. Brandon Cooks is reasonable. He's got Tolbert and Turpin to work with as far as down depth chart options, but we're already getting thin projection-wise, DFS-wise there. We've got kind of a multi-headed situation in the backfield, but it looks like Rico Dowdle's starting to pull away based on the week 2 touches. He was getting more opportunities there. Decent pass catchers out of the backfield to work with for the quarterback, though, so he can stack up points a little bit that way. Probably going to be working with Luke Schoonmaker again at the tight end position. I believe Ferg is out again this week, or got him out of the projections. I forget if he's questionable, doubtful, but I don't have him projected right now. I guess I should have a news board open for this. What's Ferg's status? Technically questionable. It's an MCL sprain. He did practice today. Excuse me. Limited practice today. This is where I say, it's definitely going to get refined. We'll have players pop in. We'll have players fall out of the projections as the week goes along. And this is also one of the reasons I love doing everything for football just kind of at the end of the week when I know what's what and there's only a few question marks, rather than doing a full show and all projections and rankings and everything and then having 9 guys be like, we're going to practice Thursday, Friday, we'll play. Or the other way around. But Ferguson, if we're assuming he's in there, then it's obviously an uptick for Dallas. If you're assuming he's not in, then it looks exactly like it's projected currently. Either way, it's a high-end side of a high-end game at 49 points, the second highest total on the board. And again, just expected to be very close in Vegas at just a 1-point spread. So definitely seems interesting. The Ravens, a much better defense in terms of stopping the run, 2.7 yards per rush attempt so far, ranks first in football. They were good against the run last year. But they've given up a lot through the air so far, and that's where Dak could potentially shine. Dak and CD stacks could shine. Even Cooks as kind of a sneaky, low-cost, reasonable touchdown upside veteran receiver. He could definitely get on the board there as a lower-owned option to differentiate a stack. 7.8 yards per pass attempt allowed so far by the Ravens, 28th ranked in football. Last season, and we'll get some DVOA stuff in here as the season goes along, and we'll talk about some more of the advanced stuff. I talked about it a lot last year, and I continue to harp on it through the beginning part of this season. I just think football is so short sample that it's very easy to just work with football and work with the, just kind of more basic, straightforward numbers. Last season, Baltimore, 5.2 yards per pass attempt was best in football. 1 touchdown per game, best in football through the air. So, presumably not going to lay at that level for the entire season, but does feed a little bit of narrative for upside for Dak. In the first couple games, Lamar threw for 273 yards and a touchdown in game 1, 247 yards and a touchdown on 34 pass attempts in game 2. He threw the ball more in the first game against Kansas City. A little bit more limited for volume in the second game, but still a decent number of pass attempts. As I've said through last week, we're usually looking 34, 35 pass attempts, somewhere in that range. If you get upward of 40, you're obviously talking about a high volume situation. Into the 50s, even more extreme. So he's got upside into a decent number of pass attempts. It just comes down to how many touchdown passes he throws in a lot of situations. He's usually going over 250 yards or thereabouts. He's obviously got the extreme rushing ability. In the week 1 game, he ran for 122 yards on 16 carries, 7.6 yards per attempt. In week 2, he ran for 45 yards on just 5 carries, 9 yards per rush attempt, though. Extreme MVP caliber upside on any given slate for Lamar. And again, quarterback 1-3 on DraftKings, 1-2 on FanDuel. Dak, in his first 2 weeks, did hit 293 yards in week 2, threw a touchdown but 2 interceptions. Touchdown, no interception, but only 179 yards in week 1 on 19 of 32 passing. He threw the ball 39 times in week 2. Wasn't a pretty game by them overall. Just kind of disappointing. I thought that would be a more interesting game on both sides against New Orleans. Obviously, New Orleans came through with their end. But just the Cowboys didn't really hold their own. They haven't looked like they're fully firing yet. I feel like the Cowboys' offense will be better than it's been as the season goes on. But Dak hasn't really been a big part of the problem. Again, the nearly 300 yards, the picks are a problem. If you're giving the ball away, that's obviously not going to help. There's no good way to end the game-by-game segment in this. Most likely of the 2 quarterbacks to throw for 300 yards. Probably Dak. This second game, these are all in just alphabetical order by these games, by the way, if you're wondering how this game log is arranged. So, total disaster in Carolina. They traded multiple draft picks and a very good receiver, and they got back a pick that they utilized on a guy who is not an NFL quarterback to play quarterback. They gave him most of last season and 2 weeks this year, and now he is out of that job. And Andy Dalton is apparently taking over. 4,800 on DraftKings, 6,000 on FanDuel. Doesn't really project well. Lands his QB 24 by points, 19 by points per dollar on DraftKings, 24 and 19 on FanDuel as well. And I stand by that. I really don't think there's all that much upside. Dalton played one full game last year. He did throw for 361 yards and 2 TDs. That was a very solid game, 34 of 58 passing. That was against Seattle. I just think it's a real stretch. Even against a gettable defense. 6.2 yards per pass attempt so far this season puts them at 15th, middle of the league. 6.1 yards per rush attempt. They've been very vulnerable on the ground. That's 31st in football so far. But I don't know. I really struggle to believe that Andy Dalton's going to establish a great connection with the Deontay Johnsons of the world. He's a wildly unreliable receiver to begin with. They don't have much of a line to work behind. They don't have much of a running game with Chuba Hubbard. Adam Thielen, solid veteran receiver. And Deontay's not bad. He's a very, very skilled guy. It's just inconsistent at best. Xavier Leggett's an interesting rookie. Dalton's on the board because he's so cheap. Maybe we'll come around a little bit. Maybe that projection will climb a little bit as the week goes on. But it's only a 40-point total in the game. They're 5.5-point dogs. There's only so much meat on the bone to begin with. Their implied total is 17.75. In the 3 weeks, it's been a average 17.5-point total. 18.75, 16.25, and 17.75. So there's just not a lot of scoring expected. Even if they have a good for them day, I don't know that we're talking about that much. It is uniquely cheap. I'll give it that. But as far as like the talent that he's got to play with, I'd probably rather jump $300 and spend my money on Skylar Thompson, given who he's going to be throwing the ball to. I don't know that it's going to be any better. Malik Willis wasn't bad for your 5,000 in last week's game. I could see a good game coming against Tennessee. I don't really like what Bo Nix has done so far. And I'm somebody who was actually advocating a little bit for Andy Dalton last year. Year before, maybe. Whenever it was that he... I feel like there was a window in there. How many games did he play the year before? 14 games. That was the year with New Orleans. That wasn't what I'm thinking. It must have been when he popped in last year. 2,800 yards, 18 touchdowns in those 14 games back in 2022. That was the extent of it. I mean, it's been a minute since Andy Dalton was truly an effective NFL quarterback. He's 36 now. I mean, it's not his fault. Everybody gets old. I struggle to see it, even against a pass defense that's middle of the road at best. Vegas last season, upper third, 1.2 touchdowns allowed per game through the air, 6.4 yards per pass attempt, upper third as well. But the bottom of the upper third, and it's Vegas. I don't think that anybody thinks they're invulnerable to the pass. Gardner Minshew on the other side of that one, facing the Carolina defenses, at least a little bit of appeal there. He ranks 12th by point per dollar on DraftKings, just puts you inside a threshold of playability. 21st at 7,200 on the FanDuel slate. Those are very different prices. 53 on DK, 72 on FanDuel from Minshew. I keep forgetting to scroll over and look at some of the numbers that I've got over here. Oh, and of course I do it for the guy whose numbers aren't appearing because he's Minshew the second. Yeah, I'll just talk about his game logs. In week 2, Minshew, there he is, 276, a touchdown and interception on 38 pass attempts, did complete 30 of 38. He's been throwing accurately, but unexciting passes. 7.8 yards per pass attempt in week 1, 7.3 yards per pass attempt in week 2. We've got 5.5 intended air yards per pass attempt. You can see how that kind of stacks up against everybody else among these numbers that are coming through here. That's pretty low end as far as the actual depth to which you're targeting these receivers. It's just a okay opportunity with some decent skill players against a bad defense. So I do think Minshew's got a little appeal there. Carolina comes in 4.9 yards per 4.9 yards per rush attempt, ranks 24th. 7.5 yards per pass attempt, ranking 25th. Last year they were... Gotta find a better way to do this. Decent against the pass. Vulnerable to the run. Yeah, 1.5 touchdowns on the ground per game and 4.1 yards per rush attempt. The rush yards are actually kind of middle of the road. They were a break, don't bend kind of a defense, giving up a fair number of touchdowns. The price on FanDuel is weird for Minshew. 72 is aggressive. I do like the skill players that he's got to work with. That's probably his best attribute, is that he's pals with Devontae Adams, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers to some degree. Couple shots around the deep threat types with Trey Tucker there. There's interesting enough receivers, and there's one star caliber wide receiver. Devontae Adams comes in at 78 on FanDuel, 76 on DraftKings with a fairly solid projection. He'll be one of the more highly ranked receivers. On a FanDuel scale, he's averaging 16 FanDuel points per game so far over the first two. So he's got high-end targets. Bowers is had a decent first couple weeks. Dalton's not going to have numbers in here. There's really nothing to look at for him. Just looking back to those first two guys real quick. Just to put some quick numbers on it. Intended air yards per attempt, Lamar, 7.2 intended air yards per attempt, 8.7. Dak's been taking a few deeper shots. As far as actually completed air yards, they're coming in around the same. Yards per pass attempt, 6.9 actually favors Lamar slightly versus the 6.6. They've each thrown 2 touchdowns. 1 interception for Lamar, 2 interceptions for Dak. We talked about that a little bit. The yardage per game, 260 versus 236. The rushing, obviously, tremendously favors Lamar. 122 yards a game. So really, just a little bit maybe of sticky value on Minshew, but it probably just leads to some of those skill players are interesting against Carolina more than it's I need to get to Gardner Minshew stacked with a bunch of his skill players in that game. Low total, not all that appealing on either side in that one. This one against Indy and Chicago, kind of interesting on both sides. We've gotten very little out of Caleb Williams. He's looked pretty awful so far. First game, 14 of 29 for 93 yards. No touchdowns, no interceptions. Came back, followed that up with 23 of 37 for 174. No touchdowns, 2 interceptions. 4.7 yards per pass attempt on average. Ran the ball 5 times in that game for 44 yards, 8.8 yards per rush attempt if you want to give him a little bit of upside. But looked a little timid out there, looked a little bit lost in terms of what some of the plays were supposed to look like. It was not a pretty game. I saw a decent chunk of it. Still got faith, but not as much as I had last week after the first ugly start. That's 2 in a row now, and there were very few signs that really showed anything as far as improvement. I'm skeptical. Let me glance at this note and see if there's anything worth mentioning in here. No, they basically say the same thing, actually. Minimal positives to point to. So, concern there, but obviously we're dealing with a ton of raw skill. So even though he ranks 17th in points and value on DK, 18th in points and value on FanDuel, and in any given slate sense, he's just kind of cheap with a little bit of upside. He's going up against a team that's allowing 5.1 yards per rush attempt, 28th, and 7.1 yards per pass attempt to rank 24th so far. That's a fairly healthy total, and Vegas at least likes him to be talented enough to keep the game close. He projects out in kind of the middle of the quarterback board. He's not good, he's not bad by the 15-point projection. Had to give him a little help to get him there, but Not bad. It's a rookie, so it's, it's working with an artificial baseline anyway. So I think he's borderline playable. The one who's truly interesting is Richardson. He's very appealing. He's got some excellent weapons to work with in that attack. Jonathan Taylor on the ground, Michael Pittman, Alec Pearson, Adonai Mitchell all through the air. So far, he's connected with Pierce aggressively. Pierce has put up 18 fantasy points per game on the FanDuel scale. Richardson's just under the 20 that we've got him projected for in this one. He's going to be going up against a defense that has been good against the pass. 5 yards allowed per pass attempt so far, ranks 4th. Middle of the road against the rush. He's got significant individual rushing upside as a quarterback, and he's also able to fire the ball downfield like very few others in the league. He is a big, big arm. So I'm interested in that spot. I'm interested in getting to stacks of him with Pittman, stacks of him with Pierce. I think him +2 kind of works, but it's the same story as with Lamar Jackson. You can run into the idea of if he does get those rushing touchdowns, there is a downstream impact. You're still scoring there, but there's a downstream impact to that correlation, that double dip on the passing touchdowns. There's only going to be so many TDs to go around. So if he takes it away from the second guy that you built into that stack, it does become a little bit lowering in terms of, your absolute ceiling in a lineup. So it's another quarterback where would roster him on his own and would probably be most aggressive about him +1s. And he's got a lot of +1s to work with. But I do think it's viable to go him +2 just because of the talent in that receiving core and the downfield shots they're able to take. So assuming this is a close game, chasing that decent total, I think they'll be throwing the ball downfield a little bit pretty aggressively. So far this season, you can see a ridiculous 13.7 intended air yards per pass attempt. Significantly higher than anybody else on this board. 4+ points higher than the next highest guy as far as I can notice. 9.1 for Skylar Thompson. That doesn't even count. 8.7, 8.6. Who's 8.7? 8.7 for Dak. So literally throwing 5 intended air yards per pass attempt further down the field than Dak Prescott is on his attempts so far. He's attempting fewer passes a game, 26.5 per game. He's only completed 13 of them per game. In week 2, he threw the ball 34 times. Week 1, he only threw the ball 19 times. That's why early season averages are a little deceptive. 17 of 34 in week 2. He threw for 204 yards. He threw 3 interceptions, which is obviously a little bit problematic. 1 touchdown. He ran for 37 yards, 4 rushing attempts. In week 1, he ran the ball 6 times for 56 yards and a touchdown. He also threw 2 touchdowns in that game, but again, only completed 9 of 19. So some mixed results so far. But there's extreme talent, and they are taking those shots down the field, and he's got guys that are clear-cut who he's going to be doing that with. So I really like the option as a stack. The rankings like him. Projections like him. QB 5.6 on DraftKings. QB 7.5 on the FanDuel slate. 6,700, 8,000. That's a bargain for that upside. So Richardson's a big yes, and then Caleb, I started with him and we'll end with him. He's going to be working DJ Moore and Roma Dunze. He's got DeAndre Swift in there. Cole Kmet is a reasonably talented tight end. He's got a few down depth chart guys that can get involved at cheap prices in DeAndre Carter and Tyler Scott, but they've done very little, averaging about 2 points a game so far on a FanDuel scale. So they've been pretty limited options for Caleb to work with, and it's not like he's been good at going to find them. I think that's a somewhat limiting factor. If he gets Keenan Allen back, what's Keenan's status? Allen's questionable. He missed last week. Rome was questionable all week and then played. Allen doesn't look like he practiced today. Seems like it's more of a no kind of a questionable. If he happened to get Keenan Allen back, it would obviously give him a little bit of a boost just by virtue of playing with another star caliber receiver. He's got fantastic weapons. There will be big games from Caleb Williams if he's got any talent at all. Next one up, one pretty good quarterback, one pretty bad quarterback. Solid single-digit rankings again this week for Baker Mayfield. QB 9 by points on both sides, 5 by points per dollar on DraftKings, 6 by points per dollar on FanDuel. Just 6,300, 7,700 against a gettable Denver D. They've landed in the mid-teens as far as how they stack up so far, but 4.2 yards per rush attempt, 6 yards per pass attempt. Definitely targetable for a very successful offense so far. Baker checks in off of a 185-yard week 2. He only had to throw the ball 19 times, but he also ran one in. Ran the ball 5 times for 34 yards and a rushing touchdown. Deep pass to Godwin for that touchdown. Didn't rival the week 1 game, and we talked about that going in. It was looking like a lesser opportunity. Week 1 was a monster against one of the worst pass defenses in football. We'll see how it works out, but everybody's going to be targeting Washington this year. Baker had a great week 1, 24 of 30 for 4 touchdowns, 289 yards, 9.6 yards per pass attempt. But on the lowered volume last week, it was still 9.7 yards per pass attempt. He's got some very, very legitimate downfield weapons, and he likes throwing to both of them. It's not that big a difference between the two where, a lot of quarterbacks will just target one guy for super high volume and then the other guy gets scraps. In this situation, both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin get a decent number of looks. They're both putting up significant totals so far in terms of fantasy scoring. Evans, 13 points on average, 21 points on average for Chris Godwin. They've both been in the end zone a couple times. Evans has never played a football season without gaining 1,000 yards. He's on his way already this season. They've got capable backs. Rashad White, I've got a little bit more limited, it looks like, than some other places do. I think that's fair coming off of a game where he's becoming more limited and Bucky Irving's about to steal that job from him. I've got Bucky a little bit higher and Rashad White a little bit lower. But there are capable running backs, and both of those guys are capable of catching the ball out of the backfield, which only enhances the stack. It only enhances the passing situation and the upside for Baker Mayfield. A couple of reasonable depth options in that lineup with Jalen McMillan out to a fairly successful start, getting a few looks a game. Cade Otton, Trey Palmer down the depth chart. The tight end somewhat limited, and then Trey Palmer as a last man in wide receiver. But it's a deep offense with 2 prime weapons at the top of it, a couple playable running backs. And Mayfield himself has been pretty good this year so far. 6.4 intended air yards per pass attempt, but he's completing 9.7 yards per pass attempt overall. 237 yards a game. He's thrown 5 TDs already to lead the league, or tie for the league lead with Derek Carr. I shouldn't say the league lead. Tied for the lead on this slate among these 26 quarterbacks. 27? Oh, no, I forgot this is 2 things up here. I was like, how do I have 27 quarterbacks on this board? 26 quarterbacks. So I think we all kind of want to play Baker. I think we're all enthused about the start. I know he's been buzzy in our chat, and he projects out well again this week. No issues with it. On the other side of that one, Bo Nix does not look very good at all against Tampa Bay. Tampa's a good enough defense so far this year, though. They've been 6.1 yards per pass attempt, ranks 14th, just 22nd against the run at 4.9 yards per rush attempt. I expect that'll improve. If we're looking at... Where's Bo? There he is. Just 2 sacks so far, 2 picks. Mid-board blitz rate, mid-board pressure, 25% pressure to throw at the rookie. I could see them coming a little bit more aggressively than that, though. Nix has not looked good really at all. He threw the ball a lot in both games. 42 pass attempts in the first game. He completed 26 of them for just 138 yards, 3.3 yards per pass attempt. Very limited there. He did put one in on the ground in like a big moment, but that was it. He threw 2 interceptions, no touchdowns in that game. Came back week 2, 35 pass attempts. He completed 20 of them for 246 yards, a nicer total. He did throw for 7 yards per pass attempt, but he threw another 2 interceptions. Ran the ball 4 times for 25 yards. They've looked pretty ugly. Did have also a big chunk play in there. They had one 40-plus yard play. Not that that doesn't count, but it kind of does pad the stats a little bit in a play that you might not get every week. So it's been pretty rough out of the gate for Bo Nix. Don't really like what I've seen. He's taking a... Where am I here? I'm on the wrong board. He's taking shots a little bit down the field. 7.7 intended air yards per pass attempt, but just 3.1 completed air yards per pass attempt, 5 actual yards per pass attempt, throwing 192 yards a game, and has yet to throw a touchdown in 2 games while throwing 4 picks. Just to summarize, he's doing a decent job gaining yardage on the ground. 7 yards per attempt is fine. 6.8 yards before contact. Not exactly breaking tackles and busting through, but did get the rushing touchdown. But very, very limited upside, and also honestly kind of limited by the skill players that he's got around him. It's not a very good football team. Javonte Williams, Julian McLaughlin, a little bit of a 2-headed running back situation. They've got Cortland Sutton, who benefits from being like a high-volume wide receiver, but that's about it with Sutton. There's really not that much additional upside with him unless he gets in the end zone. Marvin Mims, Josh Reynolds, Greg Dulcich, and Adam Troutman splitting the tight end. Really nothing of appeal here. So very skippable Denver team. 25th, 22nd, 26th, 24th ranked. Tampa Bay is where it's at. Kyler Murray, Jared Goff going to show down with a 52-point total. I missed that one as I was breaking it down. I knew there was another high total hiding in here somewhere. 52 points leads the slate. That makes this one 3 and this one 2. That's a very appealing game. Arizona favored by just 2.5 at home. Means it's basically a dead heat. Murray projects very well. Goff not too far behind. I think I've got Goff a little bit more aggressive than other places do. I like Goff. I'm not going to write off... slow start for Amon-Ra. I'm not going to write off the weak yards per pass attempt. I'm going to focus more on the volume. In week 2, Jared Goff threw the ball 55 times. Remember when I was saying at the beginning of the show about looking for 35? If I get 40 plus, I'm happy. If I get 55, I'm ecstatic. Or 50 plus. 55 times. He only threw 5.6 yards per pass attempt, though. It's a bad per attempt total. It did ring up 307 yards, though. So some good, some bad in there. Love the volume. Completed 34 attempts. No touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's not a runner at all with the football, so we don't worry about that with Goff. But we're talking about a guy who's got Amon-Ra St. Brown on his side. He's got a Sam Laporta who's off to a slow start as well. Sammy is averaging 4.4 FanDuel points per game. Amon-Ra, after the slow week 1, 11.6 FanDuel points per game. Jamison Williams leading the team at 18.4 on that scale. I'm just reading those because that's what I've got in front of me here with some of these receivers. But all those guys project out well. I've got those guys basically projected man for man. Everybody's slightly ahead of where some other places seem to have them. He's got 2 very, very good running backs who are good at splitting that job to the point where both guys are playable. They're both averaging in the 15s over the first 2 games. They're both capable of generating chunk plays. They're both capable of eating yardage and burning the clock, busting the ball into the end zone. You get a little bit more dynamic around Jahmyr Gibbs in the passing game. Got downfield option, Khalif Raymond down the board. But just skill players abound on this team. So, like the total, I have no issues going to the quarterback. I love the volume that they put up last week in the passing game. Definitely think it's worth chasing. Jared Goff lands quarterback 8-8 on DraftKings, 8-4 on the FanDuel slate. It's going up against a pass defense that has ranked 31st in football so far, 8.3 yards allowed per pass attempt. Looks like a shootout between him and Kyler Murray. Both those guys strongly projected. Both those guys have weapons. Murray in week 2, 17-21. A monster 12.7 yards average per pass attempt. Not too bad there. Threw 3 touchdowns, 266 yards. Obviously generated the monster connection with Marvin Jr. that we wanted to see. Marvin had himself a day. They've got talent. Trey McBride is a premium tight end. If he's not the top tight end, he's top 3. We'll see where it works out in weekly scoring by the end of the season. But so far, he's beating out Laporta. He's significantly beating out Travis Kelce. He's at 10.6 FanDuel points per game. They've also got reasonable weapons in Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, guys who can get involved. Good, effective running back in James Conner. This is another very good stack. Both sides of this game are easily stackable. You can go quarterback +2 on both of these teams pretty easily. QB +1 is obvious. You can definitely use this game as a game to mine some bring back plays, where you're going to the other team, you're grabbing an opposing player from the other team to join in with a stack. So you've got QB. Let's say you're stacking up Arizona. So we're going Kyler Murray. You build in Marvin Harrison, and we'll throw Trey McBride in there at the tight end position. And then we say, all right, well, maybe we can't afford Amon-Ra in that stack, but we could probably get Jameson in that stack. So we build in Jameson Williams from the other side with the idea that, one, we're chasing a 52-point total in a close game anyway, so there's just a realistic idea of scoring on both sides. But also from the idea that in the actual, as the game actually unfolds, regardless of what it looks like on this side, you need the other team to continue to score, the opposing team to continue to score to support the actual true ceiling upside for your stack. If they're up 3 scores, they're going to take their foot off the pedal. They're not going to be throwing the ball. So it's Kyler Murray's detriment at that point. They're just going to be running the ball, trying to burn the clock and win the football game. So you need these games to stay close. And by that token, that means that key players from the opposing team should be high scoring along with the high scoring players from the team that you're actually stacking. So the bring back plays, especially in super high totals with close point spreads like this, and especially with 2 somewhat effective offenses with deep rosters of skill players, those are ideal situations to stack and use the bring back play. Sometimes it's not worth doing. Sometimes you get really low end options from your bring back play, and it's just, forcing it is not ideal. But in this situation, this is a perfect game to just load up on players. Both sides of this one are in play. In terms of the numbers so far, 7.9 intended air yards per pass attempt for Murray, 6.7 for Jared Goff. Murray's thrown 4 passing touchdowns to Goff's just 1. Goff's thrown 3 interceptions to Murray's 0. But Goff's throwing for more yardage per game. He's thrown more attempts per game by a significant margin. Murray's also capable on the ground. Whoops. What did I just click on? Murray's also capable on the ground. 50 yards rushing on 5 carries per game over the first 2. 57 in the first game, 59 in the second game, 11.4 and 11.8 yards per rush attempt so far this season. Very capable rusher. Maybe a little bit underrated in that department. It's hilarious that I thought we were going to be out of here at 8:30. My buddy Charlie's just going to have to sit in the other room and chill if he's actually coming over. Let's jump into the chat, see what you guys are talking about. 14 people here hanging out. I haven't had chat up this whole time. Trey's a little under. Don't think Denver pushes him. Still in on him. Dallas fans saying it was 5 years old. Dak wasn't going to get it anyway. We're talking about Dak. Power says Terra Cincinnati, Atlanta has 1 run, 5 hits total in the 6th. There we go. I guess Atlanta's not going to come through. Brendan Donovan hit a home run, though. So did Alec Bohm, per my Yahoo updates. Let's see. No, Charlie is coming over. Good. I ended up just deciding to get cute and chase that Bo Bichette scratched. So much for that. I was just going to say I decided to get cute and chase that Blue Jays stack, and now I'm just seeing that Bo Bichette scratched, and that game just got started. Well, that's annoying. Anyway, I had put that together with the Yankees to chase Yankees upside, and I had Landon Knack, who was smoking the Marlins. 7 strikeouts over 5 innings for Landon Knack. Not bad. Well, Bo Bichette not playing is going to suck. Oh, well. That's what happens when you dive into a football show. Anyway, let's keep making time here so Charlie doesn't have to sit in the other room on his own for too long and talk to the dog. Malik Willis. Presumably, I'm operating under the assumption that he's starting this game. We did have Jordan Love limited at practice on Wednesday. Apparently non-committal is the quote about whether or not he's going to play. I have a hard time believing he's going to be back that quickly. I think one more week of Malik Willis I think we would probably have a little bit more of a firm commitment if Love was going to be back. If it's Love, obviously you're going to fire away. If it's Willis, it becomes a little bit more of a challenge. He's very cheap at $5,000 on DraftKings. He ranks 21st by points, but 11th by points per dollar, which is appealing. FanDuel's got him at $6,900, not at all appealing, 21st and 20th by points per dollar. Love would be significantly higher ranked. In 2023, Tennessee allowed 1.2 touchdowns per game through the air while giving up 6.8 yards per pass attempt, which was in the bottom third of the league. It's a believable passing upside despite them out of the gate at a pretty good 3.9 yards per pass attempt. I don't expect that to hold up at quite that elite a level. They're also 10th against the run so far, 4 yards per rush attempt allowed. Against the run last year, they were pretty good if memory serves. Yeah, 3.8 yards per rush attempt and 0.6 touchdowns a game. So the run is a little bit more realistic. Probably should be a little bit more vulnerable to the pass. Again, we'll take a firmer look at some of the defensive numbers as they shore up as we get another couple of weeks in here. Willis, in his week 2 performance, completed 12 of 14 passes, 122 yards, a touchdown. That was it. Not a bad performance. Obviously, was highly accurate in that scenario. It's a little bit of believability there. Just 5.5 intended air yards per pass attempt. Completed 8.1 yards per pass attempt, though. Did run with the ball. I'm not sure why his rushing stats not coming up. Oh, you know what? I'm just realizing, ignore the rushing numbers. I'm just realizing I don't think they came along for the ride. Are they on this stat board? No, this is passing. That doesn't have it either. I forgot that the rushing stats come from this rushing board. The numbers that I've been reading in the game log are correct for the rush yards. So just we'll go by those. The per game numbers that I read for one or two of these guys were just the first game. I forgot that comes from a different board. Apologies. I think I mostly read the rush numbers off of the game logs anyway. On the other side of this one, it's Will Levis. Another pretty low-end quarterback option this week. Levis ranks 23, 21 on DK, 23 across the board on FanDuel. Doesn't really project out all that strong for 52, 6,800. He's averaging 8.5 intended air yards per pass attempt. He's thrown 2 TDs in his 2 games this season. 19 of 32 in the first game for a touchdown and 2 interceptions. 19 of 28 in the second game for a touchdown and an interception. Was better in the second game in terms of yards per pass attempt, 6.9 yards per pass attempt. Ran the ball 4 times a game for 9-ish yards per rush attempt, but that's not really a tremendous skill either. It's the him and Calvin Ridley show, really. They do have DeAndre Hopkins lurking somewhere with whatever's left of his talent. They've got a good dual-headed running game in Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. Both of them can catch the ball a little bit out of the backfield. Tyler Boyd is on the roster as well, but I mean, everybody in this lineup except for Tony Pollard and Calvin Ridley have been a little bit underwhelming to start the season. So might just be another day to go to those 2 players and maybe mix in some of the other, a little minimal amount of D-Hop at 5,400, 5,300 on DraftKings. Doesn't look like a stacking day, but there are decent skill players on that team. And it's kind of the same thing if you get Willis on the Green Bay side. Might be just more of a day to consider some of the wide receiver depth because they do offer a lot in that department. They've got Josh Jacobs at the running back position. You could just grab him and expect low volume passing and heavy volume for Josh Jacobs. Then there's Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks. It's a deep receiving core. They've got multiple tight ends who are a little bit in play a piece each week, but it favors Tucker Kraft. A lot to work with on Green Bay. I'm just questioning what the upside for with Willis truly looks like. Total in that one, just 37.5. Despite the close game, not the most appealing total. The second lowest on the board. Bouncing back nicely with a C.J. Stroud versus Sam Darnold game here, though. Darnold's been awfully interesting the first couple of games of the season. QB 11 on DraftKings, 2 by value, 11 on FanDuel, 7 by points per dollar value. It looks like we're going to be considering some Sam Darnold. Doesn't project poorly in a game against a pretty gettable Houston defense. On the other side of that one, C.J. Stroud, who's just kind of okay in the Sunday night football game. Managed his way to an effective game, wasn't overly impressive, disappointed DFS-wise, but won the game, had a decent day. Comes back ranking 7th, 13th, 6 and 8 on the FanDuel slate is more appealing over here. On DraftKings for your 7,100, just okay as far as the points per dollar number goes. But it's a quarterback that I really like against a defense that is probably going to land in the upper third of the league this season. So it's a playable high-end spot as far as the score goes on both sides. I do think it's a game that can support bring back plays. You've got talent on both sides of this one. Darnold's upside is going to live and die a little bit with the status of his wide receivers. Last time out, he played the game with no Jordan Addison, and then they lost Justin Jefferson along the way. They still managed to win the game. He led them to a comeback in the fourth quarter. He's also got Aaron Jones questionable. Jefferson and Addison are both questionable right now. So if we're down to Jalen Naylor, Brandon Powell, Trent Sherfield kind of receiving core with Ty Chandler as the lead back, it does get a little bit thin around Sam Darnold, which would probably limit his projection overall, which would probably bring things down a little bit in the long term or in the short term. We'll see what it looks like. That is how I've got them in right now, but I haven't artificially lowered his projection yet. I kind of want to see where it lands with Vegas. I feel like Vegas expects at least one of the receivers to get in there. So we're keeping an eye on that spot. Definitely the more interesting of the two, though, is C.J. Stroud, given all the weapons that Houston brings to bear. It's a dynamic stack. Joe Mixon's been really good out of the gate. He carried the ball a monster 30 times in week 1. I don't have the number in front of me for how many times he got his hands on the ball in week 2. It was less. It's actually worth looking up. Mixon is coming in with a Q tag. Ankle injury, did not practice on Wednesday. Might thrust Cam Akers, Daria Agunbowale, or Agunbowale. I got to learn to say that name correctly. Might thrust those guys into more of a light, but my money's on Joe Mixon getting in the game. I don't know why. Yeah, just 9 carries for 25 yards in week 2, 3 catches on 5 targets. So that was just 14 potential touches after 33 potential touches and 33 actual touches in week 1. So the volume came down significantly, but they were not exactly challenged in that game against Chicago. It was an easy game. 23 of 36 for Stroud, 260 yards, a touchdown. Flawless, 7.2 yards per pass attempt. There's nothing wrong with it. They just didn't have to do anything. It's a game where they only had to take out so much to win the game. Caleb Williams did not hold up his end of that matchup. So I think you go right back to the well, and with this team in presumably a little bit better of a matchup that could have a little bit of a shootout trend. Stroud is averaging 7.7 intended air yards per attempt. He's completing 7.3 yards per pass attempt. He's thrown 3 touchdowns on the season, multiple 300-yard games with heavy touchdown volume last year. One of the lead quarterbacks in the league in terms of racking up yardage and just phenomenal weapons to work with. I started talking about that and I got stuck on Joe Mixon. But his receiving core, Nico Collins, Steph Diggs, Tank Dell, I mean, that is 3 absolutely elite receivers. He's got Dalton Schultz, who was a little bit limited in week 2, limited output so far with Brevin Jordan as the backup tight end, but a couple capable tight ends. Assuming Joe Mixon's out there, that's a high-end running back. If it's not, that just probably encourages him to throw the ball a little bit more, because who the hell wants Cam Akers carrying the ball? So at worst, I think we gain upside from that. But you want Mixon out there to have true success for Stroud. So keep an eye on the situation on the depth chart with Darnold. Who's going to be active? Who's going to be catching the ball? If you don't recognize the names of the guys who are catching the ball, if they don't stand out to you, he's probably a little bit more limited. It will create a value stack, though, because, I mean, when we pull those guys up, if we're looking at him with Jalen Naylor at 5,900, Brandon Powell at 45, Trent Sherfield at 42. Those are FanDuel prices, 44, 34, and 32 on DraftKings. That's going to show as a point per dollar stack no matter what, and it'll probably play that way. But if this dips, say a few points come off that total when we get confirmation about some of the skill players on Minnesota, then it becomes a little less appealing. Premium game on the Sunday night, KC Atlanta. It's only available on FanDuel. No Patty Mahomes, no KC for you on the DraftKings slate. They've taken some bumps in the offense for sure. No Pacheco for the foreseeable future. Had what's his face was the big Carson Steele was a hot pickup in season long this week. So was Samaje Perine. I expect Carson Steele to get the bulk of the carries, and Samaji's just going to kind of continue to do his thing. Few touches. He'll see an uptick in touches. But it seems like Carson Steele's going to be the lead back. He's going to be a threat for touchdowns. And all you really need to do on this team is carry the ball a handful of times, burst through the line a few times for some key first downs, get your short yardage touchdowns when they need you to. Otherwise, this team's marching up and down the field via the pass most of the time. They seem to like him a lot. Gained a bunch of yards in college. He's at Ball State, I want to say? (6'1", 225, undrafted. I have to look it up on fucking... Oh, UCLA. Why did I think Ball State? Where the hell did I get that? Must have read a note about somebody else that's stuck in my head. Oh, Ball State his first 2 years. That's why. 1,500 yards was his sophomore year. 2 years ago. 2022 at Ball State. I knew Ball State was in there somewhere. See, I see these things and they stick in there, and then for sometimes I don't know where they come from. Gained 1,700 yards from scrimmage that year at Ball State in the MAC, 15 touchdowns. Last year at UCLA as a junior, played 12 games, gained 5.1 yards per rush attempt, 847 yards, 6 TDs, caught 17 passes for 9.6 per attempt, 2 touchdowns. And again, just one of these little fire plug kind of a running back. So could see him busting through the line for some touchdowns, picking off some red zone upside at the very least on some carries there. Perine will be the receiving running back. He'll be the guy who probably you want to pair with Patrick Mahomes more often than not if you're taking somebody out of the backfield with Mahomes. But obviously, we've got a receiving core to work with here, with Rashee Rice being pretty decent, Xavier Worthy being a very exciting, dynamic player. Travis Kelce yet to show up for this season. I think he's still out on tour mentally with Taylor Swift, but he's been playing. Hasn't really been catching many passes or scoring many fantasy points, but he is out there. I can vouch for it. Noah Gray, a second tight end who's outscoring the lead tight end so far. A couple depth receivers, Justin Watson, Juju Smith-Schuster could break one off as very cheap down depth chart guys who will see a couple snaps, couple looks. So it's a deep team, it's a playable team, and they're not all that expensive. 310 on the FanDuel slate. Mahomes on his own is always going to stand tall and carry the stack to prominence. They're not the most appealing overall stack considering that 10th ranked points per dollar, but they're always going to be on the board to some degree. Going up against Atlanta, it's a gettable enough defense. On their side, they're giving up 5.9 yards per pass attempt. I keep writing off Atlanta's defense. I did that on the main slate show the other day, and they shouldn't be. 5.9 yards per pass attempt allowed so far this season ranks 9th. 4.1 yards per rush attempt ranks 12th, and they were decent. Kirk Cousins, outside of that game-winning drive, didn't look great in week 2. At least I didn't really think so. Came away 20 of 29 for 241, 2 touchdown passes, 8.3 yards per attempt. Was fine, but didn't really stand out. I think he's got more opportunity here in a pretty highly total game that should be competitive and close on another Sunday night to step up and continue to gain familiarity with his skill players in that Atlanta offense. So there's definitely some appeal there. He's got some good weapons to work with. Bijan Robinson, a premium running back. Drake London hasn't done a ton for this team yet this season. Another player kind of slow arriving over the first 2 weeks. Kyle Pitts, similar story at the tight end position. You've got Tyler Algier, who's gotten some touches, gotten some carries. Darnell Mooney, who's gotten involved in the passing attack. Ray-Ray McCloud's gotten involved. So there are some downfield weapons. There's some ability to attack over the middle. There's an ability to attack from the running back. A lot of options in that stack, and they're not crazy expensive, but Cousins comes in at 15 across the board on FanDuel. Again, not available on the DraftKings slate. He's taking an average intended air yards per pass attempt of 6.8. Mahomes just 5.1. They're not taking as many shots, operating a little bit more dink and dunk style in Kansas City so far. Neither of these passing attacks has been overly effective yet this season. Just 3 touchdowns apiece for these guys. Limited in terms of the yardage per game so far. Each guy's thrown a couple of interceptions so far. But we're talking about 2 high-end over-the-years quarterbacks. Mahomes is obviously still there. Kirk Cousins, we'll see what's left. We've talked about him each of the first 2 weeks. In the beginning of last season, before taking that injury, he had multiple 300-yard passing days, a couple of big touchdown days. So I'm not writing Kirk Cousins off by any means. Justin Fields, I'm coming around to writing off. First couple of games for Fields, pretty unimpressive. 17 of 23 for 156, no scoring, no interception at least in game 1. He ran the ball 14 times for 57 yards against Atlanta. Game 2, 13 of 20, 117 yards and a touchdown, but no interception. But no real quality to speak of. 5.9 yards per pass attempt on 20 attempts is low end. 8 carries for 27 yards, 3.4 per attempt, 4.1 per attempt in week 1. There's nothing special about any of those numbers. It's a low-scoring game at 36 points. Pittsburgh favored by 2.5. Justin Herbert on the other side of that one going up against Pittsburgh's defense. I kind of prefer the Pittsburgh D in that head-to-head, I got to say. Herbert hasn't looked all that great. He missed practice on Wednesday. He's dealing with an ankle. If it's not him, it's Easton Stick. In week 2, Herbert went against Carolina, 14 of 20, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, 6.5 yards per pass attempt. Week 1, just 17 of 26 for 144 and a touchdown, 5.5 yards per pass attempt. Between the 2 quarterbacks, I'll take Justin Herbert with a little bit of faith. He's got Quentin Johnston, who has taken a step forward. His first-round pick last year. We mentioned him going into week 1 as a guy who could potentially be interesting in the suddenly short receiver room. They've got a rookie lad, McConkey, who's just been okay. He's fairly cheap. Both those receivers are fairly cheap, actually, looking across both sites. So that makes him a okay consideration in a points per dollar sense. Joshua Palmer, a mix-and-match quality depth receiver. Not a lot to love as far as that goes. The best feature of this offense so far has been J.K. Dobbins. He's been a beast with the ball in his hands for this team, kind of surprisingly. So I think that's soaking up a little bit of our passing volume in the pass attack, which is already kind of limited by the short depth chart of quality pass catchers. Justin Herbert coming back around from injury, just kind of projects in the middle of the board, coming up with another injury, might not even play. Seems pretty limited. 22-24 on DK, 22-26 on FanDuel, and Fields 18, 14, 16, 12. Pretty skippable guys. Mama's saying, I took the 2 home run prop for Riley and Machado to win $10K. Need Riley to get 1 more. Nice, dude. That's killer. Go get it. Not bad at all. A lot of Cowboys fans, or a lot of Cowboys chatter in the chat anyway. So we're at the hour mark. We're not doing too bad. We're making it through. We're down to, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4 games left. Not bad. Not exactly the pace I was looking for. Feel like I've been talking awfully fast and kind of ignoring the chat a little bit. That's what happens when you shoot for hour shows, especially with me. When I think about it, it amazes me. Did we say nothing at all those years on any of those Awesemo Stochastic shows? How were we doing like 2 or 3 man booths for an hour with extended commercial interludes like every 5 minutes? How the hell were we getting through those shows and providing any information at all? I really don't know how it was done. I can't get through a show of my own in under an hour. Anyway, Gino looked pretty good in week 2. Ranks decently this week. He's another quarterback with some pretty good weapons. 3 good receivers. DK had a day the other day. Whew, clunky. DK Metcalf had a good week 2. Jackson Smith and Jigba is a quality second or third option. A little bit shorter passing attempts by and large. Tyler Lockett, another downfield veteran receiver with significant upside if he can manage to. Broke the stem off the pen. If he can manage to get it in the end zone, A lot of upside still for Tyler Lockett on the right day. Even coming off of a down season, I still have decent expectations, especially with working with a guy like Geno who can deliver the ball very, very consistently. Geno, if nothing else, is an accurate quarterback. 33 of 44 in week 2, 327 yards, just one touchdown. A little bit disappointing on the actual volume getting into the end zone, but you love the 44 pass attempts. They went into overtime in that game. I forgot about that. I'm just reading the note here. Connected with DK Metcalf on a biggie. A lot of big playability from those 3 receivers. They're going to be relegated to Zach Charbonnet in the backfield again, so presumably decent upside to feed the beast in the passing attack. Going up against a Miami team that's given up 7 yards per pass attempt to rank 23rd in football so far, and they're going to have Skylar Thompson at the helm, so presumably Seattle's going to have the ball in their hands quite a bit. You got to worry a little bit about the overall point spread. Seattle favored by 5 in a home game, just a 41-point total. This could get ugly in a hurry with Skylar Thompson filling in for Miami for the presumably absent Tua Tagovailoa, or definitely absent. They put him on IR, presumably done with his career. Tua Tagovailoa. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality we're dealing with here. Geno averaged 7.7 intended air yards per pass attempt. He's throwing 249 yards a game. He's throwing the ball 35 times a game, exactly on the nose of what we're looking for. In terms of volume, it's right there with all these other premium options. Geno lands QB 12-7 on DraftKings because he only costs $5,600 over there somehow. He's QB 12-17 on FanDuel because on FanDuel they priced him way up at $7,600. It's a little weird. Smoke detector's going off again. This has been like 48 hours of this, just like every couple of minutes or every couple of hours. These super loud smoke detectors, I think they're in my building, but there's no fire. They go off. They were going off at like 3 a.m. yesterday. I sent my friends a text message. It made me realize the only thing I know about is surviving a fire, if a fire breaks out, I learned from Homer Simpson. And that amounts to Homer waking up in the middle of a fire in one of the episodes way back when and panicking and saying, "Oh, remember the song, remember the song." And then he sings, "When a fire starts to burn, there's a lesson you must learn. Something, something, something. Then you'll see, you'll avoid catastrophe." And he didn't know, and because he didn't know what the thing to do was, neither do I. So if a fire breaks out, I'm just going to die. Thanks a lot, Homer. Classic Simpsons episode. That was the one where Homer stayed home from church. Classic. All-timer. Skylar Thompson doesn't exactly project all that well. He's obviously got some primo weapons to work with in that Miami attack, but it's a matter of the effectiveness of his ability to get the ball in their hands. Tyreek Hill, though, can do a lot if you can manage to put the ball in his hands. Devon Achane can do a lot if you manage to put the ball in his hands. It might be a really rush-heavy game for Achane. Might be a good day to look him up and look up some Jalen Wright. Maybe even some Jeff Wilson as a depth option with 3 running backs there. No Mostert in the attack on the ground this week, but should be a decent upside game for the rushing attack, if nothing else. But I do still think that Tyreek Hill is going to be playable. Jalen Waddle, probably playable, but probably a little bit diminished expectations with ceiling. Waddle's too talented to completely say that he's going to be diminished just because the quarterback's not going to be that great. In 119 NFL pass attempts, Skylar Thompson's averaging 5.2 yards per pass attempt. He's thrown 1 touchdown and 3 picks. That's across 3 seasons of very limited action. I really don't see all that much upside even in a price sense, especially because he comes in at 51.66, 26.23, 25.25. I think if anything, you're just mining skill players from the Dolphins. If he was really cheap, then maybe we could argue it, for a value play. But it's between the two, I'd probably go his direction over Andy Dalton, again, just on the talent that he plays with. But neither one of them is all that really truly appealing. And Dalton, on just pure price with a similar projection, has slightly more appeal, I guess, because he's cheaper. Very limited options, though. Not a fan of diving into the discount quarterback pool all that often. It's just a position that just demands high-end play. So if you get a guy who's cheap for a reason, doesn't actually buy you that much more often than not. Another ugly game between the Browns and the Giants. I don't like either side of this one. Daniel Jones did get there last week, but just barely. Just by the skin of his teeth, and it's entirely thanks to Malik Neighbors. Neighbors is good. Jones is not. 39-point game. Cleveland favored by 6 at home. Giants, a very limited team. Limited passer. He's capable of running the ball from time to time. He did throw 2 touchdowns in that game, but he was 16 of 28 overall. 178 yards, 2 touchdowns, 6.4 yards per pass attempt. Limited. He's a limited thrower. They have limited ability to throw the ball downfield. They did lose the game. That actually wasn't Danny Jones's fault. It's probably the GM's fault for not thinking that kickers are important, apparently. So many issues with this GM, Joe Shane. But the Giants are just not good. There are a couple skill options. Absolutely would roster shares of Neighbors. I think he's going to continue to excel and see significant targeting. I forgot I do have the target numbers. $18 targets last week. No other Giants receiver had more than 4. So when I say it was all Neighbors, it was all Neighbors. You can definitely continue to go that route, though. I don't think he's going to be at 18 a week, but 10-plus looks a week is definitely in the cards for Malik Neighbors. So he's significant. Nobody else on this list is overly significant as far as need to have them on their own. If you're stacking up Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones, and riding with this team, you certainly want Neighbors as your number 1 option. And then pick your poison between basically Slayton and Wandale. Those are the only other 2 guys who are going to get any kind of reliable volume. Theo Johnson got a few looks in week 1 and then went targetless in week 2 at the tight end position. Still did see a bunch of snaps out there, if I'm remembering correctly. Well, whatever. We'll get into those guys later on. So they're very limited at tight end. They're limited at the wide receiver position outside of Neighbors. It's just not a good offense. Devin Singletary is okay at the running back position. He's not my choice of running back, but he's had okay days. It's just a limited bad team. And then on the other side, the Browns, nothing special about them. Deshaun Watson coming in 5,500, 7,300. He is probably still the better of these 2 quarterbacks. In a win the other day, 22 of 34 for 186, no touchdowns, no picks. Ran the ball for a touchdown, 5 carries for 20 yards, 4 per attempt. Week 1, he was 5 for 39, 7.8 yards per attempt on the ground, 169 yards through the air with a touchdown and 2 picks on 45 pass attempts. They are letting him throw the ball. 45 attempts week 1, 34 attempts week 2. It's a defense that will be vulnerable enough to the pass. Giants currently sitting 27th at 7.8 yards per pass attempt and 29th at 5.3 yards per rush attempt. So it's a very bad team on the other side that Deshaun could take advantage of. I just continue to think we're dealing with a player who's just artificially limited by absence and everything on top of it. He's got okay skilled players to work with. Mari Cooper's good. Jerry Jeudy's decent. Elijah Moore's okay. Jordan Akins at the tight end position is low cost with some touchdown upside. The running back situation there with Jerome Ford is the lead back, and then a little bit for Pierre Strong is not too bad. Jerome Ford's a reasonable option. There's nothing particularly high end there, but I could see a Watson and Amari Cooper, a Watson and Jerry Jeudy getting there. I don't know how much you stretch it to +2s, though. Giants will probably be coming after him. What's their blitz rate so far? 26.6% blitz rate, gaining pressure 23% of the time. They've come away with 6 sacks, just 1 pick so far. Their secondary is going to be vulnerable all year long. The reason I'm kind of waffling on it is because Watson does land 10 by points per dollar on DraftKings. 14th by points, 14th in both categories on the FanDuel slate. So not super appealing in any way, but at least in a points per dollar sense, you've got a little bit to work with at 5,500. He's on that list on DraftKings. What's up, Charlie?
What's up?
Charlie's here. I got 2 games left to talk about. Your team's up now.
They're playing as we speak.
Charlie's a big Eagles fan. Now we're talking football in here.
Oh, fuck football. Garbage product.
Charlie's not happy with his Eagles. Really just one play burn the Eagles last week. I think they come bouncing right back. 49.5-point total in the Eagles game going up against a very decent-looking Saints team. Should be a fun one to watch, if nothing else. 2.5-point spread there, so basically a wash in a home game for New Orleans. Love the opportunity on both sides of the ball. Jalen Hurts ranking 2-4 on DraftKings, 2-1 on FanDuel, our top points per dollar quarterback. Derek Carr not far behind, coming off of 2 very successful weeks. Ranks 6th by points on DraftKings, 1st by points per dollar, 4th and 3rd on your FanDuel slate. Not a bad option at all. In week 2, Carr threw the ball 16 times, but completed 11 passes, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns. In week 1, completed 19 of 23 for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. 15.2 yards per pass attempt in week 2. They got out to a huge lead. Didn't need to do much in the second half, so that's where the limited action comes from. And that's what I was talking about before. You do need the other team to keep up. They were up by like 35 coming out of halftime. So they just didn't need to throw the ball. So it limited Carr's upside artificially. But if he had thrown the ball another 10 times, he probably would have thrown another touchdown pass and another 100 yards. Developed a great connection right out of the gate with Rashid Shaheed, who I took in basically every league. Love that as a downfield threat. They've connected on a few deep balls already, a 70-yarder in week 2. He also had Alvin Kamara, obviously, on his side go off for a huge day in the rushing game. Kamara's a good receiver out of the backfield. Carr's got weapons galore to work with in that attack. And then Jalen, with no A.J. Brown, developed a little bit of a connection with Devontae Smith. More limited with Saquon. Obviously, that big drop that Saquon had that would have put the game away, to rub it in for some Eagles fans who were in the other room. But there's weapons on that Eagles team still. Dallas Goedert's a good tight end with touchdown upside. As we talked about, as long as his limited A-dot comes within range of the end zone, we've got reason to believe that Dallas Goedert can do some scoring. John Dotson, not really averaging anything so far, but does have a little bit of ability to get down the field. Paris Campbell, some limited options in terms of those guys. You had a more sneaky Britton Covey last week, who could come right back and have that gadget role again. He caught some short balls, burst through the line, and had some pretty decent gains. So he's that kind of a dynamic guy. We talked about him in terms of being the kick and punt returner over the years. With those skill sets, those guys, when they get thrust into roles where they're going to catch a few passes, become a little bit interesting as game breakers. Hurts was looking at 6.7 yards intended air yards per attempt. He's thrown 3 touchdowns and 3 picks so far over 2 weeks. Carr, you can see the significant downfield shots at 8.6 yards per intended air yards per attempt. Again, that pales in comparison to the 13.7 that Anthony Richardson's put up, but it's second in the league behind that. So they're taking big plays down the field. He's also completed a league-leading 11.4 yards per pass attempt on the season. 5 touchdown passes against 1 interception. Do I think it continues like all year long? Probably not. But do I think it's at least fairly realistic with a guy who is a high-end quarterback over the course of his career, who we had decent expectations for last year? Yeah, I kind of do. I think the weapons are very real. I think the connection is very real with those weapons. So I have no issues saying that it's at least 85% real, somewhere in that kind of territory. And week by week, it's going to math out pretty well. Philly's vulnerable to the pass. Looks like a great spot for scoring. 49.5-point total, ranks number 2 on the board. And then our last game up is the Rams and the Niners. The Niners slowly losing a war of attrition to the injury list, but otherwise still a very good football team. Brock Purdy, 6,700 across sites, ranks 13-16 on DraftKings, 13 across the board on FanDuel. He's just okay. He's a quarterback that, as I've said multiple times, just a guy who gains value from the skill players that he plays with. But he did throw for 300 yards in a more limited situation last week. I think there's upside there. 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Week 1, 231 yards on 19 of 29 passing, 8 yards per pass attempt. A reasonable expectation that he can throw against this Los Angeles defense. They're still favored by 7.5 in this game. They've still got some dynamic weapons with Jordan Mason in the ground game. McCaffrey's going to be missing for a while. Debo's going to be missing for a while, but they've got Brandon Ayuk in this pass attack. So it's just a next man up kind of a situation there. George Kittle George Kittle fills in the tight end role pretty effectively. Jawan Jennings, not a bad depth receiver with a lot of upside and a lot of skills. Might have him a little under projected. I actually should write him down. I'll just click him and highlight him. So Jawan Jennings is not a bad option. And then some depth skill players on that team to work with. On the other side, it's the same situation for the Rams. They might be even more hampered by injuries. They've lost both Puka and Cooper Kupp now, so Matthew Stafford kind of working on his own. It's him, Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, and the passing attack pretty underwhelming there with an underwhelming tight end in Colby Parkinson. We've got Kyron Williams, a pretty capable running back who has had a couple of limited performances so far, but a lot of skills there. I tend to lean away from stacking Rams in this situation. 20th ranked for the quarterback, 22 on FanDuel, and has had just limited success so far. Just thrown 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 260 yards a game, but pretty empty yardage. 7 yards per pass attempt on 5.9 intended air yards per attempt. Stafford threw 317 yards with a touchdown and an interception in game 1. Came back in game 2, 216 yards, no scoring, no pick. 49 attempts in the first game, but now again, 21 of those went to Cooper Kupp, who's no longer on the field. They're going to have to go somewhere. DeMarcus is probably going to lead the team in targets, but you're dealing with a much more limited receiving core now. So not a ton of support, not a ton of expectations around the Rams. Both sides of that last game, a little bit limited. You can see it in those quarterback projections. I don't love either side of that. 44.5 point total tells me that there's going to be some scoring there, but probably a case where we just pick up some of the high-end skill players from San Francisco and call it a day. And with that, gang, we've reached the end of our hour and 20 minute. Not too bad. Reached the end of the line here. That's our quarterbacks, our last first look show. Quarterbacks, game situations, game environments in the books. We'll talk skill players the rest of the week. We'll talk stacks. I'll get projections updated up on the site. Appreciate you very much. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe, do all those cool things on YouTube. With that in mind, enjoy the rest of your nights. I'm going to punch out. I'm going to go enjoy whatever's left of that joint that Charlie's smoking in the other room that I can smell. Thank you, Andy. I thought it was great too. It was fun talking to you guys and getting into the football slate early. Just stay tuned for, either in Discord or on the baseball shows. I'll let you guys know when the other football shows are going to land. It'll be tomorrow, Friday, as far as when those shows are going to go, though. I'm going to try and keep them off of Saturdays. That's about it. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Adios.